Hello to everyone watching today, and thank you for joining us on our street photography course. Over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be giving you some insight into street photography from static architecture shots all the way through to moving people. Now, before we get started on that, one thing we wanted to do, since we're here in Paris, is talk to you about the history of photography and where it really began. So for those of you who don't know, street photography is pretty much the OG of photography. So we're here in Place de la République. This is the first place that a photograph was taken. Behind us today, you can probably see a McDonald's, maybe a lot of traffic, and definitely a lot of cars. So it's definitely not the same as it was, but this is really the place where photography began its journey. And the really great thing about that is that since then, we've moved so far forward that you can take a picture in nanoseconds. So over the next couple of stops, we're going to take you around Paris and talk to you about everything that you might want to see if you came to visit here, from Henri Cartier-Bresson's hunting spots to the invention of the daguerreotype. We're going to head out and meet Yossi Akinsanya for the next couple of days so she can talk to you about how she captures photography and street photographs, whether that's in the United Kingdom or travelling abroad. But first of all, we're going to go and have a little explore, and hopefully you can learn something that you can share in the pub with your friends, or maybe tell your mum, who knows? So let's get going. So we've come 6 minutes down the road to Boulevard du Temple, or Crime de Boulevard, which loosely translates as the Crime Boulevard. And at this point we see photography in the hands of an engineer. We're looking at about 9 years later, and Louis Daguerre has basically got frustrated as an engineer with the technology that photography offers. And at this point, the shutter speed levels were hours, and photographing people therefore was almost impossible. So he began the process of shortening that period of time, and he was incredibly successful and got it down to 15 minutes. And that was a type of photography that is known today as the daguerreotype. As an engineer, he was really interested in the process and in how to fix an issue that he felt was really important to the world. And later on, which we will cover, his methods and his technology increases is how we got to the place we are now, where we can take photos in nanoseconds. So why are we stood here? You might be thinking, this doesn't look that great, it's not that fancy, why have we come here? But this is the place where Louis Daguerre took the first known picture of a human being. It was completely by accident. So he was trying to test his process. He was taking pictures of buildings in the place where he lived, which is here. And in that process, he ended up capturing a shoe shiner. The reason that became so famous is because a shoe shiner does move, but the person having their shoe shines will often sit there, even back in that time, and basically just stay still. So 15 minutes of this person staying still, and here we are today looking back at the first known picture of a human being. So this meant that right here in this street in Paris, a human being remained motionless enough to be immortalized in history forever. So here we are, quite near the Notre Dame. As you may be aware, the Notre Dame is under reconstruction following a fire a couple of years ago. But that isn't going to stop us. So after 1838, street photography and documentary photography began to boom. Those that could get hold of cameras were really invested in making them work and exploring what photography was and how they could do that. And obviously before that point, documentary was really in the form of paintings. Around this period, between sort of 38 and maybe 1890, Eugene Adget became the photographer that really coined the term street photography. He only took pictures of the Parisian streets and nothing else. So why are we stood here? There's a period in Paris called the Haussmann era. Now, this is a little more architecture and a little less photography, but it plays a huge role in where photography went from that point onwards and why it went international. So the Haussmann era is an era where a lot of poverty-stricken Parisians were forced out of their homes. And the goal for Haussmann was to develop new buildings, modern buildings, buildings that were identical across Paris and gave it more of a clean look and feel. Now, behind us is a pre-Haussmann era building. There are 3 left in Paris. One is the Notre Dame, but as I mentioned, we can't go there today, so this is why we're here instead. Now, as you can see behind me, there is this really beautiful, detailed Gothic architecture feel to it, whereas the balconies that you see in Paris today, the clean round buildings with flowers going all the way up, this really frustrated the Parisians, because compared to this, they didn't feel that it had the beauty that the original Paris architecture had. So this is really where a lot more of the standard people, normal people, were playing around with photography and where cameras began to spread across Paris. They were documenting the destruction of their own towns, their own villages, their own parts of the city, and they wanted to capture that moment in history to show people what had happened to the Paris that they knew and loved. Now, this brings us up to 1900s. Now, I know what you're thinking, we've gone through a lot already, and you maybe didn't know that photography was that old, but the 1900s is where a lot of the stuff that you might know about and might remember comes into play. So as we moved into the 20th century, Parisian photography became more self-conscious. And that brings us on to people like the Surrealists and Bresson, who initially started to become more famous in 1924 when he met the crème de la crème of Parisians and started hanging out with people like Picasso and Matisse. So photography as we know it was changing and adapting the same way that painting was throughout these eras. Now we move into the 1950s and we start to see people like Henri Cartier-Bresson and Diane Arbus creating work. Now, in terms of where we're standing, the Café de Fleurs is a very famous cafe where Magnum Photos was first created, but we'll come on to that shortly. First of all, we're going to talk about Henri Cartier-Bresson. So, Bresson started photographing really in 1940, and his tool of choice at this point was the Leica M3 and a little nifty 50. This was his camera that went everywhere with him. Every picture you see, the decisive moment, these famous shots were all taken on an analog camera. So you might remember from earlier that we talked about a man called Daguerre. And the daguerreotype, as we mentioned before, was all about shutter speed and increasing that. Now in the 1950s, we're up to a mere few seconds, if that. And the analog cameras we're using have really progressed from your large format cameras. Now they're really compact, really easy to hide, really easy to shoot with. So gone were the cameras of the past, and into the 20th century came the point and shoot. Now again, you couldn't change your lenses. This wasn't something that you could adapt and alter as you went on shooting. So it's important to remember that whilst the pictures may not be as crisp and clear as we see them today, they were working with a lot more limitations. So why are we stood outside this cafe? Well, there are 4 names in photography that you might remember. And those are the 4 founders of Magnum Photos, later to become 3 and eventually 1. So that was Henri Cartier-Bresson, Robert Capa, David Seymour and George Roger. George Roger dropped out to pursue his own career, but these 3 gentlemen had met and been introduced through friends and mutual acquaintances, and they'd come to this cafe behind us to have a conversation about how to conquer the world through photography. The aim was simple. It was to capture all of the important moments in history and ensure they weren't being missed. So the 3 remaining members, Capa, Chim and Bresson, decided to tackle different areas in the world. Capa would remain in Europe. He later died in conflict whilst photographing wars, and Chim met the same fate. He took over the south of the world. He went to places like Brazil, the Amazon rainforest. Cartier-Bresson took India and Asia. And when Cartier-Bresson returned, he'd found out that his 2 fellow colleagues and the 2 other founding members of Magnum had passed away whilst photographing. So at this point, we find a lonely and somewhat sad Cartier-Bresson in Paris wondering what to do with this organisation that they had created. And Magnum Photos hadn't really taken off. So the question is, does he continue with his own work and explore the world alone, or is he going to continue building this fold? Now, with the 3 founding members, there are 3 people to tackle the world, and 1 man alone can't do that. And this is where we begin to introduce other photographers to what we now know as Magnum Photos worldwide. From this point onwards, Cartier-Bresson, a very young photographer at the age of 28, began interviewing other photographers he'd heard about across the globe. And as we mentioned, at this point, photography had really gone worldwide. It still isn't what you know today, where everybody has a camera, but it had definitely expanded into press and into news. One of those people was Don McCullen, who he interviewed in the cafe behind us, reviewed his portfolio and teamed up with Life magazine to make Magnum Photos what it is today. Now, if we fast forward a little bit, in 1994, Martin Parr welcomed into the fold. Now, Martin is an art photographer, and that really did change the face of Magnum forever. We're not going to cover that, although it is a really important moment in street photography because it wasn't in Paris and it certainly wasn't here. But for now, we're going to go and shoot, because how can you not when you're standing in the place that Cartier-Bresson basically changed the world of photography forever. And as much as I would love to use my Canon camera, which we'll come on to later, for now, I'm going old school with a point and shoot. So that brings us here to the Collège de France. And the reason we're here today is because Roland Barthes started writing Camera Lucida in 1977. So not only did he lecture right here in this very college, although a lot of things have changed, but he also was able to write and publish this book in his time here. Now, this is one of the most read books internationally. Worldwide, universities all over the globe will read this and study their photography from it. So that brings us to an end of our little history tour through Paris, France. Obviously, we want you to join us over the next coming weeks, and tomorrow we're going to go and meet Yossi Akinsanya and introduce her to you for this street photography course. But at this point, photography has gone global. To this day, everybody carries a camera in their pocket. Your phone, everything you own sort of bases itself around photography. And if you go on holiday, I'm sure most of your parents, you and your children, are taking pictures. So for now, thank you so much for listening to this, and what better way to end the day than reading my Roland Barthes book outside of the Collège de France.
Hi, I'm Yossi and I'm here with Wex Photo and Video, and we are in Paris. I'm here because I'm part of their masterclass for street photography, and I kind of want to tell you guys a bit more about me. So as I mentioned, my name is Yossi and I've been doing photography for about 6 years now it's come to. I kind of started photography where I explored every different area, so from fashion to getting together with people and trying to do editorial shoots that you would kind of see in magazine spreads and trying to submit those and trying to get submitted to all these places, to even doing travel, to doing weddings for family, to doing events, to doing corporate headshots. And I just found that it wasn't really for me until I got to the point where I was really struggling with being social and having that anxiety when it came to shoots. And one day I said, you know what, I'm just going to go down to London Fashion Week by myself. I don't really have any friends in the creative sphere, and I don't really have any photography friends to go down with. So I just said, you know what, I see everyone go each year. This would be a great way to kind of talk to people, put myself out my comfort zone, and I loved it. I said, okay, this is great. This is kind of where I got into street photography, but it was still very fashion focused. And then I think over the pandemic, when things kind of opened up again, I started to travel. So it kind of then moved from being fashion street photography into being more documentary and street style. So that's where I'm kind of today. I've been going around. This is my 3rd time in Paris this year, and I've been doing a lot of street photography, and it's just been amazing to kind of show different cultures, lifestyle, and just being able to see those little details and things. So it's amazing to kind of go to a place and shoot tourist locations, but it's just the people that make these places, I find. And yeah, that's what I really love about street photography, and I can't wait to kind of show you guys how I find those images, find those moments, and yeah. There's so much I like about Paris, from the way they stack their chairs in their cafes to how different they look to places you would find in London. I just love how things look, documenting the different relationships here, because, you know, Paris is seen as the city of love, so it's so nice to see all the different displays of affection. But in terms of photos, in terms of editing, I've really grown a style. So when I first started my photography journey, I kind of was just trying to pick up from all the people around me. I guess it's great while you're starting out, because I guess you get to figure out what you like and, you know, shooting different things. But the great thing about it now is, like, I've grown into an area where I'm like, this is what I love, this is what I care for. And then with my style and my editing now, it's got to the point where people can see my pictures and they're like, oh, this is Yossi stuff. I've only got to the point now, 6 years in, where I'm like, street photography, documenting and sharing stories is exactly where I want to be. It's definitely not a straightforward journey. It will take some time. You may go back and forth, you may go in circles as well, but that's part of the process. So over the years, like I said, my sister used to blog, And, you know, being the annoying little sister I am, I decided I want to do that because she seems to be getting stuff, she seems to be enjoying it. And I said, sure, I'll do that too. So a lot of my work was fashion heavy, and a lot of the opportunities I was getting was because I was a blogger myself. Then I also grew my Instagram for my blog over the years. And then kind of during the whole Black Lives Matter phase, that was an opportunity for me to kind of talk more and be more honest about my experiences. And through that, I got a lot more exposure to my page, and I grew quite quickly during that phase, and it was quite overwhelming, but it was also great to kind of have these new opportunities in front of me, although I didn't really love how it came about, because I wish people did discover me through my own content, but that's how things happened. So with that came a lot more opportunities in terms of creating content for other brands. So it came to a point where I was changing as a creative person, where it was all about aesthetics and doing things for brands, doing things for people, where I didn't have enough time to create content for myself, and I missed that. But it got to a point where I had one day in Notting Hill where I did 3 shoots back to back, and I took people, I would literally pick them up, finish the shoot, drop them, pick up the next person and go to the same location. And I just found that I was grateful for the people I was meeting, but I just didn't find it very interesting, because it was the same kind of thing, same kind of outfits, where it was everything that was on trend, which is why I really enjoyed Fashion Week, because it was very expressive what people wear. Whereas when it got to street photography and, you know, just really bringing in those moments, I just feel like I've really changed in that sense. And that's where it kind of turned for me, where I realized that actually what I was putting out wasn't very inspiring. And I'm someone that when I look at content and take it in, I want to be inspired. I found that a lot of the stuff I was taking in and putting out was just aesthetics. I decided to kind of remove my Instagram. I'd grown a following to around 16K, which I was very grateful for. But I decided I kind of want to pull back, start over again, and just realign myself with what I truly cared about and what was important to me. I've kind of realized that street photography is where it is for me, and with so many important things and moments happening each day in the news, you know, there's a want in me to kind of be able to share that. So that's how I've kind of transitioned from fashion and outfit of the day kind of things into more of a street style. I'd rather people don't know I'm taking pictures, just so it feels a bit more authentic and not overly posed kind of style of photography. So with the whole kind of starting over process, it was a hard decision, but I think I was so amped up by the point where I was just like, do you know what? There's more to being a creative than just money. There's more to it than income. It can be very easy to be led by money, and that's where I felt I was doing, where I was putting my health, putting my social life, putting everything aside just because I wanted to kind of have that income coming in. And I just realized enough is enough. You can say no to money, you can say no to things, you know, you don't need to keep pushing yourself and overworking yourself. My thing was walking away. I just wanted to be honest. I don't want to be seen as an influencer, but as a content creator and, you know, my journey, I wanted to be very honest with it. I haven't taken the traditional route of taking courses, doing a degree, doing it as a topic. I just kind of picked up the camera and I've learned to use it to my best ability. So that's one thing I really would love to get across, is that you don't need to know everything, and you don't always have to kind of go with what everyone else is doing. Your journey will be very different. Mine was. When it comes to starting out on street photography, my advice would be to do and work with what you have. Don't feel like you need to kind of buy the latest things to kind of feel like you're keeping up, because a lot of the time with photography, I do believe it's the person that makes the photos, not the equipment. Because I could have this camera and you can give the same camera to another person, and what we shoot can end up being completely different. It's about learning to use what you have, learning to make the most of the features, and just being really comfortable. Also, don't be nervous to go up to people, especially in street photography. If it's a fashion element, people are very friendly. It's great to kind of start conversations, because you never know the people you're shooting. Sometimes it could lead to amazing things and open so many doors. And don't be afraid to also, you know, just post your work everywhere. Just keep pushing, because again, it carries so far. You don't know who it's going to end up on. Like, it's the same thing with tweets. And when you find certain photographers, you just have to think about, well, how did this person make it to my feed? It could be as simple as someone resharing their picture on their story, and it gets to you and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in love with this person's work. And that's just how it is. It's just about, you know, hoping that you land on the right person's page and just keep going. Over the next 4 weeks, there's going to be different pieces coming out. So we will be starting off with things like gear. So, you know, what I use, gear in terms of lenses, in terms of how I shoot, whether it's shooting raw, things like that. Then there's also taking static street photography. So that can be things that are easier to do and plan. So that's things like taking pictures of buildings, you know, getting your framing right for that, settings, and then onto the bit more harder stuff. So actually shooting people, growing your confidence, asking questions and going up to people. Like also, you know, when it comes to street photography, what's right, you know, when it comes to like actually shooting people's faces, or just being able to maybe even shoot people and them not be aware, you know, things like that. And, you know, just knowing that you can take those pictures without feeling too stressed or feeling too overwhelmed. So if you're watching this masterclass and you take anything from it, or you do take any photos, we would love you to share them with us using the hashtags WexHowTo, and we'll be looking through them, and let's go.